What if a single drop of DNA under a victim's fingernails could shatter decades of uncertainty? For one small family, the emotional agony of not knowing carried them for over 2 decades, haunted by unanswered questions every waking moment. Now, a truly disturbing breakthrough promises to expose the hidden truth they most feared but never stopped hoping for. In the unsolved cold case of Leslie Prieur, investigators discovered male DNA in her own shower, an eerie trace of real violent intrusion that turned a domestic scene into something chilling. This disturbing evidence lay dormant for years, waiting for advances in forensic technology to resurrect the case. It's a true events nightmare that refused to stay buried. Through slow-burning forensic progress, genetic genealogy revealed a name buried in public databases, pointing to someone who had vanished from their own family's narrative. The criminal mind behind the horror remained hidden until the forensic net finally closed in. This chilling twist underscores how far science can stretch and how deeply human evil can hide. Real footage of the interrogation room shows a man feigning shock, asking detectives, "Can you let my girlfriend know?" A seemingly innocent plea, yet laden with deception. That moment, captured and replayed, reveals the psychological tension between innocence and guilt in the rawest form. The hidden truth begins to surface, layer by layer, under relentless scrutiny. The case remains disturbing. Lost time, cold leads, vanished. Hope until that DNA match pulled one man into the glare of forensic reality. The evidence that sat silent for years finally spoke, forcing investigators to confront the reality in real, painful detail. Its true events unfolded with forensic precision, exposing what had been buried. Days earlier, detectives had orchestrated a covert ruse, placing water bottles at Dulles Airport to collect discarded DNA from a suspect. When he unwittingly drank from one, they held the key to decades of unanswered questions in their hands. That one act, spiked with determination, would catalyze a chain of revelations no one saw coming. When confronted in the interrogation room with that clandestinely obtained DNA, the suspect's composure faltered, but not in ways investigators expected. His deflection and denials carried the weight of long-practiced evasion, even as the evidence stood immovable. The palpable tension in every gesture revealed a psychological chasm between what was said and what was known. Interrogation records show multiple requests for a lawyer, as if trying to plug holes in his defense, but detectives pressed on, inching toward confession through tacit permission. Ironically, the very boundaries meant to protect rights helped expose the unfolding truth. The painstaking techniques used here reflect a harrowing balance between legal restraint and relentless pursuit of justice. 2 decades of silence exploded into a dramatic courtroom confession in May 2025, when the suspect pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, ending 23 years of unanswered grief. The family, still reeling, experienced a simultaneous wave of relief and renewed anguish. Justice, finally, but too late. The emotional price paid in waiting cast every revelation in haunting relief. And just when everyone believed the case had reached its final chapter, the interrogation video, sealed for legal reasons, was released, revealing subtle pauses, breathless lies, and a gaze that froze time. These visual clues reignite questions. What did he say and what did he fear? The release of that footage marks a turning point, promising even deeper truths still to come. The video shows his hands restless, rubbing the table, tapping fingers in a syncopated rhythm. For seasoned interrogators, these are not meaningless gestures. They are tells. Small, involuntary leaks of a mind under siege. In forensic psychology, such micro-movements can signal more than nervousness. They can point to deception, guilt, or suppressed memory. Detectives watching the footage years later would note how often his eyes darted away when certain words were spoken. Words like shower, blood, and DNA. The case against him was no longer circumstantial. DNA matched. Opportunity confirmed. But the interrogation footage gave prosecutors something far more potent. A window into the criminal mind. Caught in real time, investigators revisited old crime scene photos, the bathroom tiles, still stained faintly despite cleanup efforts, and the chaotic swirl of objects left behind. Every image carried the same silent accusation. This was no random act. It was intimate, intentional, personal. Friends described the victim, Leslie, as meticulous and guarded. She would never have let a stranger into her home without a reason. That fact narrowed the scope of possibilities and made his denials ring hollow. During one chilling moment, a detective slid a single photograph across the table. He glanced at it for less than a second before looking away, jaw tightening. It was the first and only time his composure fractured completely. In the psychology of interrogation, such fractures are pivotal. They are the points where a suspect's mental scaffolding begins to collapse. It's here that trained investigators decide whether to push harder or let silence do the work. For 3 long minutes, the room was silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning. He avoided eye contact, his breathing shallow, his hands still now locked together like a man bracing against impact. It was as if he was rehearsing an internal story he'd told himself for decades. Then, without prompting, he asked, "Will this go to trial?" The question hung in the air, a quiet admission that his fate was no longer in his hands. For detectives, it was the closest thing to a confession without the words, "I did it." But the most chilling moment wasn't his words, it was the detective's reply. "That depends on what you tell us next." What followed would shatter not only the case, but the very narrative the suspect had clung to for 23 years. He leaned back in his chair, the metal frame groaning under the sudden shift. It was a defensive posture, one that put physical space between himself and the evidence. But distance couldn't save him. Now every inch of that room was saturated with proof. The detective began reciting the DNA findings in clinical, unemotional detail. Each word landed like a blow. Matched, confirmed, cannot be excluded. The suspect's face twitched, as though the syllables themselves were chiseling away at his defense. Forensic analysts had gone further than a simple match. They had traced his genetic profile through public genealogy databases, building a family tree that narrowed him down to a single living male relative. It was science that turned suspicion into inevitability. "Your DNA was found under her fingernails," the detective stated. No embellishment, no drama, just the raw surgical truth of a crime you cannot undo. He exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on a point far beyond the interrogation room wall. It was the look of a man calculating whether denial or admission would cost him less. Neither option would save him. Then came the detail he hadn't expected: the water bottle from Dulles Airport. Discarded casually into a trash bin, it became the single most damning piece of physical evidence. The moment he heard it, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of 23 years had finally pressed down. Seasoned interrogators call this the drop. The instant when the suspect's body language confirms what their words still refuse to say. In that second, the case against him went from probable to undeniable. Yet still, he tried to salvage his story. He claimed he and Leslie had met briefly, nothing more. But the forensic timeline dismantled that lie, placing him inside her home at the time of her death. The silence that followed was suffocating. Detectives didn't rush to fill it. They let it stretch, a psychological vice tightening around him. Eventually, he whispered something almost inaudible. "It wasn't supposed to happen." That single sentence cracked the case wide open. But what it wasn't, why it happened, remained buried in the layers of his guarded confession, waiting for the next question to peel them away. Detectives leaned in, lowering their voices to force him to focus. "Tell us what wasn't supposed to happen," one asked. His eyes glistened not with remorse, but with the strain of holding back. He spoke in fragments. Words tripped over each other, names half-formed, events blurred. It was a partial truth, the kind designed to sound honest, while keeping the worst details sealed away. Forensic evidence filled the gaps. He refused to. Blood pattern analysis revealed a struggle near the bathroom door, evidence that she had fought for her life. Every stain told its own story, louder than his trembling voice. The autopsy confirmed bruises on her forearms consistent with defensive wounds. She had fought him with every ounce of strength, and in doing so, had collected the DNA that would one day bring him down. His version of events cast himself as the one who lost control, as if the crime were a momentary lapse. But investigators knew that loss of control doesn't explain why a shower was cleaned, why fingerprints were wiped, why time of death was obscured. In the end, the most damning evidence wasn't just scientific, it was behavioral. His evasions, his selective memory, his need to control the narrative. All hallmarks of someone who feared the truth more than the sentence. After hours of probing, he finally admitted to being in the house the night she died. No break-in, no accident. Just a meeting that turned fatal and a cover-up that spanned 2 decades. When the recording ended, jurors sat in heavy silence, absorbing every twitch, every pause, every calculated omission. They weren't just watching a confession, they were watching the unraveling of a man who had outlived his own lies. The guilty plea sealed the case, but for Leslie's family, closure was an illusion. Justice had arrived too late to stop the years of grief, suspicion, and unhealed wounds. And yet, the haunting truth remains. Without that discarded bottle, without the forensic precision of modern science, and without the psychological chess of interrogation, this case might still be unsolved. Somewhere, right now, another bottle lies in a trash bin holding answers no one has yet thought to ask.